Just 2 days after US President Joe Biden pledged to make the Kabul bombers pay, the American military struck back in a drone strike in Nangarhar province.
I can confirm, as more information has come in, that 2 high-profile ISIS targets were killed and 1 was wounded. And we know of 0 civilian casualties.
In Kabul, some of the 170 victims of Thursday's blast were laid to rest.
Our hearts are on fire. How long should we lose our lives and be humiliated? This is really a big loss for all of us.
13 US service members were also killed, including 22-year-olds Max Soviak and Hunter Lopez. As evacuation flights continue, the Taliban has blocked some roads in what it said around the capital. And despite the deadliest blow to its forces in Afghanistan in more than a decade, the US has vowed to complete its evacuation mission.
Now, as the military mission begins to end in Kabul, thousands of service members are working across the globe and within the United States to complete this incredibly important mission.
With only a few days left until the US withdrawal deadline, the White House says further attacks on Kabul are likely.
The threat is ongoing and it is active. Our troops are still in danger. That continues to be the case every day that they are there. This is the most dangerous part of the mission. This is the retrograde period of the mission. And what that means is that this is the period of time when the military, commanders on the ground, and forces begin to move not just troops home, but also equipment home.
Some are being relocated to third countries. In Germany, the US's Ramstein air base looks like a refugee camp as people are given health checks and stay in tents while their paperwork is processed.
And so we've been able to take our war reserve materials throughout all of Europe and consolidate it, talk to our army partners and bring it all in. And so that started last Thursday. And then Friday we basically started the inflow, and it's just been a little bit chaotic ever since.
But not everyone has been able to make it onto an evacuation flight. Some Afghans are fleeing to Pakistan. And as the security and humanitarian situation worsens by the day in Kabul, uncertainty remains over what the future holds. Floyd Cush, TRT World.
Our correspondent Eunice Paksoy joins us live from Washington. Hi, Eunice. We heard from the Pentagon first, who said that threats at the airport remained real and active. But then just a short time later, we heard from the White House directly and the president in this statement saying that attacks were likely. When you use the word likely within the next 24 to 36 hours, that certainly sounds ominous, especially for all those people who are still guarding the airport and still trying to get to the airport to escape the threats that exist within Afghanistan.
Exactly. It must be such a hard moment for US service members and their family members here in the United States, and also for all those Afghan people that still try and leave the country before the deadline, before the end of the month, because we've seen those heart-wrenching pictures coming out of in and around the Kabul airport, where US service members are trying to hold people back because there is such a chaotic environment there. And the people are desperately trying to get out of the country, fearing that the Taliban rule, any Taliban-led government is going to be deadly for them. But obviously, days are really numbered right now, and people are trying to get to the airport, but they know that they're going to be blocked in some instances by the Taliban. So it is such a mess right now around the airport. But the United States is saying that the Biden administration, to be more precise, they're saying that the national security team advised the military to take all precautionary actions around the airport so that a terrorist attack, the blast earlier this week, doesn't repeat.
And you know, the Pentagon was very low on details when it came to these 3 people, Daesh-K operatives who were targeted in Nangarhar province. And it doesn't seem at this point, at least, like they were directly involved in the attack on the airport, does it?
Not really, because the Pentagon would have said so if these were the people that were struck by the United States military, if they'd been actually the people that are directly responsible for the blast on Thursday, then they would have said so. They would have said, yes, we went in there, we hunted them down, just like the president instructed us to do so, and then we finished the operation. But they said that we can't confirm the reports and we can't deny them either. And they didn't really go much into detail. They just said that, make no mistake about it, the Daesh-K operatives were killed, and it definitely dealt a heavy blow to their planning capabilities. This is the only thing so far that we've heard from the Pentagon. But people are obviously wondering, not only in Washington, D.C., but also across the nation, citizens are wondering whether it was the revenge that President Joe Biden promised earlier this week, right after that blast. That question remains unanswered.
Right, obviously Biden wanted to send a message here to other terror planners within the country. He did, though, the Pentagon did, call these three who were targeted high-level planners and facilitators. Thanks so much, Yunus. Let's go now to Omar Samad, who's a former Afghan diplomat and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, joining us now live, also from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. So when we listen daily to what the Pentagon says, they took a lot of questions about the ability of the Taliban itself to fight Daesh. The Pentagon did confirm that the Taliban had actually thwarted some attacks before the one on the airport on Thursday. But over the past few days, the Pentagon has said that they can't speak for the Taliban's intent. They're not sure what they will do as regards Daesh. In your view, what do you think about the Taliban's own ability and desire to tackle this group?
Well, ability and desire are two different things. As far as desire or the will to fight Daesh, if you look at the record going back to 2014, when IS-K emerged in Afghanistan, eastern and a bit in the north, you see a trend whereby the Taliban and Daesh have clashed on numerous occasions. At times, the former government of Mr. Ashraf Ghani and U.S. forces and Taliban, all three actually have gone after Daesh and even have cooperated with each other. But also many Daesh fighters, fearing the Taliban, came to Ghani's government for protection. And some of them were actually incarcerated because they knew that instead they would be killed. So the record is pretty clear about the intent of the Taliban versus Daesh. Obviously, the ability issue is a totally different issue. In some cases, they have the ability, it seems, in some other cases, like the other day, it seems like a Daesh suicide bomber was able to get through. We don't know exactly where, how, and what role the Taliban played in being or not being able to prevent that from happening.
So let's talk a little bit more about Daesh-K. They're based in Nangarhar province on the border with Pakistan. Is this group growing? Is it recruiting members? And if so, who are they?
Well, I think at the height of their existence, they probably had, according to intelligence sources, no more than 2,000 or 3,000 active members in Afghanistan. Their linkages to the Middle East is very, very weak. These are mostly remnants of other terrorist groups who feel like they would like to fight under the banner of Daesh, as we've known it, as when they emerged about 10 years ago in the Middle East. So this particular faction, the Khorasan faction, has had a presence in eastern Afghanistan to some extent, in southeastern Afghanistan, as I said, in the north. But they have been decimated to a large extent. So now we think that there are no more than a few hundred. But there's one thing that is happening. There are reports that there are some urban Daesh members or some young and youth who are dissatisfied with the Taliban and other groups and with the situation overall, and they are joining Daesh. So it could now become sort of an urban phenomena, and so this means that the Afghan cities obviously are at risk, and the Afghan cities have been hit by Daesh on numerous occasions in the past few years.
That is a fascinating dynamic. Omar, thanks so much. You've added a lot of insight to this threat. TRT World's Ali Mustafa is in Kabul. He says the focus is squarely on that August 31st deadline and what lies beyond.
The United States conducts more drone strikes against suspected Daesh Khorasan planners and masterminds. Now, the U.S. believes that these are the individuals that were involved in the bombing of Kabul Karzai International Airport, in which around 170 people were killed. This is, of course, the Afghans that were killed. In addition to these, 13 U.S. servicemen also died as a result of the suicide attack. Despite all of that, evacuations out of Kabul continue as the deadline of August 31st approaches. The United States says there are less than 4,000 U.S. citizens and servicemen left at the airport, the military side of it. The Taliban says it is eagerly waiting for the United States to leave so it can announce a government of sorts, an interim setup or a more inclusive setup. We'll have to wait and see. But a lot of people are now focused on that deadline and what lies beyond.
Turkey's defense minister has attended a welcome ceremony for Turkish troops who've returned from Afghanistan. At least 700 soldiers were part of the NATO mission in the country, and on Friday, the second batch of these soldiers made it to home ground.
The situation developed faster than expected, and the conditions quickly became difficult. As you know, the transfer of our personnel and equipment started late on August 25th. With the approval and instruction of our president. An air bridge was quickly established between Kabul and Islamabad with 8 aircrafts that we had previously deployed to Tajikistan and Pakistan. Our personnel and citizens were evacuated from Kabul in less than 48 hours with 8 planes and 2 helicopters. We also provided necessary support for the evacuation of citizens of other countries. Despite the tension at Kabul airport, the seamless evacuation in a short time showed the world once again the power of the Turkish armed forces.
The Iraqi government has hosted a regional summit in Baghdad looking to mend relations among regional rivals. Discussions focused on partnerships, regional stability, and sovereignty. Of course, the climate crisis was also on the agenda because the entire region is struggling with rising temperatures. The leaders of Qatar and Egypt also met for talks for the first time in 6 years. TRT World's Yusuf Aram has more.
A very important regional summit in Iraq was capped off today as participants pledged solidarity to help tackle common challenges that the region is facing, from counterterrorism to climate change. The participants also pledged to help Iraq strengthen its state institutions and wanted to see parliamentary elections being held that are going to represent the Iraqi people. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu was also in attendance today, and he pledged to help rebuild Iraq and also talked about economic cooperation. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We must implement strategic infrastructure projects for the development of our peoples. As part of the commitment we made at the 2018 Kuwait Conference for the Reconstruction of Iraq, we are ready to collaborate on some strategic infrastructure projects. They include the opening of a new border gate between our country and Iraq in Overkoy Fish Harbour, the road and railway connection from Fish Harbour to Baghdad, the rehabilitation of the roads and railways between Baghdad and Basra, the establishment of an organized industrial zone in Mosul, the contribution to the expansion of the Basra Fall port, implementation of projects in the field of infrastructure, irrigation and water management. These projects will contribute to the development of not only Iraq, but the entire region.
Another highlight of today's summit was the meeting between Qatari and Egyptian leaders. Now, this meeting marks the first time in 6 years that Egypt and Qatar has sat down at a top level with each other, and this is viewed as a significant step since the January 2021 Al-Ula reconciliation agreement. Also of note during the summit was the presence of Iran and Saudi Arabia together. Now, we know that both countries are arch rivals, so both of them being at the same summit together was definitely a step in the right direction towards reconciliation. And this puts a cap on the whirlwind diplomacy that converged on Baghdad today.
And our editor-at-large, Ahmet Aliolu, says Iraq is trying to be a mediator.
It is for the Mustafa al-Kadhimi, the Iraqi Prime Minister. It is a very essential conference that he held today, and in which he tried to present himself as a player, a regional player in the region, trying to bring in different parties for the first time on the same table. He managed to bring the Qatari Emir for the first time with the ruler of Dubai, or the top leader in the Emirati leaders, and this was very striking. In addition to meeting the Emir of Qatar with the Egyptian president as well. Interestingly, the Syrian regime wasn't invited for this conference, but still, as Yusuf has just illustrated, that the Iranians and the Saudis are there, which seems that the Iraqi government is trying to play a role to bring these two rivals into terms and mediate a kind of reconciliatory dialogue between these two countries. Now, for him, it is very important, for the Iraqi Prime Minister, because this comes weeks before the pending Iraqi election in October this year, in which he wants to play a major role for the constituents in Iraq, and because of the challenges that he is facing during his term, and this kind of diplomatic success would play into his interest in the pending election.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is on his first official visit to Montenegro. It's part of a two-day tour of the Balkans. He's already met his counterpart, Milo Djukanovic.
In this period, when the whole world is going through a heavy trial due to the pandemic, we have further increased mutual solidarity and cooperation. Our friendship was strengthened by the aid we sent to Montenegro and the use of Montenegro for the evacuation of our citizens. In the meeting with the President, we confirmed our will to further our relationship. I believe that we have serious economic potential, even though the pandemic has negatively affected our trade and investment figures. We set a target of $250 million worth of trade between our countries, and we agreed today to continue towards achieving that goal.
Most of the region, in fact, the Balkans used to be part of the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years, and this is where this relationship between these countries with Turkey are basically stemming from. And when we have a situation with Montenegro, we also heard President Erdogan mentioning, and also his counterpart, Milo Djukanovic, they were mentioning historic ties that go back all the way to the friendship between the Ottoman sultans, but also the king from the Montenegro. So this relationship is actually looking at some more options to be improved. And in that sense, Turkey has a heavy presence in Montenegro for the past decades. I would say most of them are usually the projects that were conducted by TİKA, that's Turkey's state-run agency. They've been running for more than 300 projects in this country, and there are so many projects that needs to be implemented in the coming future.
China has accused the U.S. of political manipulation after an American report into the origins of COVID-19 accused Beijing of withholding information. But different branches of U.S. intelligence disagree on what the origin could be, as Furkan Yağmur reports.
A bioengineered monster virus or human contact with an infected animal. Just what was the origins of COVID-19? 3 months ago, 2 U.S. intelligence reports were handed over to President Joe Biden. One report concluded that the COVID-19 virus was either a lab accident or an interspecies contamination, while another found several researchers at China's Wuhan Institute of Virology became ill with an unidentified infection or disease in November 2019. And this fueled fresh public pressure on Biden to delve deeper into the origins of the virus.
The President asked the intelligence community to redouble their efforts to collect and analyze information that could bring us closer to a definitive conclusion and to a report back to him in 90 days.
In April 2020, just a few months after the virus was first detected, then President Donald Trump said that people were looking closely at the theory of a lab leak. It was initially dismissed, but the theory has become more plausible for many, partly because no evidence has emerged to back alternative theories. The Chinese, on the other hand, have always denied allegations and now claim biolab accidents happen far more often in the United States.
The U.S. also has the world's worst biolab safety records. We suggest that the U.S. stop slinging mud at others and instead find out what happened in its own labs first.
While there is frustration about the way China has answered questions about the outbreak, experts believe these allegations are more political rather than scientific.
There are political tensions in the world at the moment, and these have fueled some of those conspiracy theories. And I think a lot of the speculation concerning the origins of this virus are very similar. They are simply wrong, and I don't think should be taken seriously. However, it's very easy for such ideas to emerge.
It's been almost 2 years since the start of the pandemic, and scientists are yet to discover the exact origins of the virus. But U.S. intelligence are intent on doing just that, no matter how long it takes. Furkan Yağmur, TRT World.
The man who assassinated former U.S. Attorney General and Senator Robert F. Kennedy has been granted parole. 2 members of the slain senator's family, including his son, sent letters to the parole board in support of his release, while several other family members vehemently oppose it. Usman Aliyu Uba has more.
Palestinian-born Sirhan Sirhan was serving a life sentence for the assassination of New York Senator Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. The younger brother of President John F. Kennedy, Robert, affectionately known as Bobby, served as Attorney General in his brother's administration. 5 years after JFK's assassination, he began his own run for the top job. On the 5th of June 1968, after winning the California Democratic primary, Kennedy gave a victory speech. Moments later, as he shook hands with supporters, he was gunned down by 24-year-old Sirhan. Kennedy died the next day. Sirhan spent more than 50 years in prison and has been denied parole on 15 previous occasions. He says he fired at Kennedy because he was angered by his support for Israel, despite claiming he had no recollection of the killing.
So you have some divisions in the Kennedy family as to whether or not this full parole should be granted.
Sirhan's lawyer says her client has never been accused of a serious prison violation and that authorities consider him a low risk to the community. But he's not free just yet. The final decision on whether to proceed with the parole and release Sirhan rests with California's governor. Usman Aliyu Uba, TRT World.
Hurricane Ida has hit Cuba, making landfall on the southwest coast. Wind speeds have reached nearly 130 kilometers per hour, with heavy rains, flash flooding, and mudslides in western Cuba, Jamaica, and the Cayman Islands. The U.S. Hurricane Center predicts Ida will strengthen into an extremely dangerous Category 4 hurricane before making landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast on Sunday. Daniel Montero joins us live from Havana. And Daniel, I know understandably that your signal may not last with us, but while we have you, tell us what you've been saying. I know that when Ida hit Cuba, it was a Category 1, but that can still do significant damage.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yes, it actually became Category 1 right before entering Cuban territory. Of course, the damage could have been bigger if it was a stronger hurricane, but still, it did damage the electrical grid in the provinces of the west of the country. Also, some significant damage to some of the agriculture in this region, and in specific municipalities within these locations, several houses have been damaged as well. Of course, in Cuba we are used to this type of situation, but it's always complicated.
People have been also struggling with coronavirus there too, so this is one more thing to disrupt lives.
Yes, certainly. Within the last couple of months, we have been living the worst period of COVID in the country. Last year, we did very well, but lately it has gotten out of hand. And in a hurricane, part of the protocol within the country is to put as many people as possible in more protected locations. And that happened in this particular case too. So it is two risks that you have to consider. You put people in a safer location, those that are at risk because of the floods, because of heavy rain, but that could also cause an increase in COVID cases. But it is a risk worth taking in this moment. And of course, it all adds up to a very complicated moment in the country.
Right, very good points. Daniel, it's great to have you join us from there. Be safe. Let's take a quick look at other stories that are making headlines at the moment. In Nigeria's state of Niger, parents have been reunited with their kidnapped children. Families, teachers, and well-wishers gathered to welcome 190 school children who have been released now from captivity. They were held for nearly 3 months, but they're just part of a wave of mass kidnappings by armed gangs that have spread fear across North Nigeria. Hundreds of people have rallied in El Salvador over the government's plans to use Bitcoin as legal tender. The protesters say they'll lose out because of Bitcoin's volatility. El Salvador's Congress was the first in the world to embrace cryptocurrency as legal tender. And finally, born into freedom. An Afghan woman has given birth to a baby girl during an evacuation flight from Kabul. En route to England, the little one was delivered by a Turkish Airlines cabin crew at an altitude of 10,000 meters. The crew members named the newborn girl Hava. The flight arrived to its final destination after landing in Kuwait as a precaution. The mom and baby are very happy and healthy. Thanks for